Okay. We're going to cover probably this week and 2 more weeks, so you get a good basis. And like I say, I always do these so everybody knows why you're doing what you're doing. You have the research base for it, and you get to see some models of what we're doing. There's some really good articles here. This higher order questioning is a really great article, which you really should look at as a basis for you're going to be doing a read aloud this week. I will talk about the read aloud and give you a model for it, show you one that I've done in staff development, and I'll show you one that a former graduate student has done. When you're doing a read aloud, the basis for a read aloud is you're going to be going through the gradual release framework so that you're going to be modeling your thinking and building a comprehension skill. And we're going to do that using a graphic organizer. So you're going to develop the graphic organizer, put it here. Then you're going to videotape yourself doing the read aloud, and I'll show you how that works, and submit it there. It probably won't take more than 10, 15 minutes worth of video. You can do it with a class if you want, with a small group, with one student, or to a make-believe class. It's totally up to you. Everything you do in this course, of course, is related to your unit. So you should be thinking about what text you want to use to go along with it. And, you know, I know that we have science, social studies, math teachers, so it's a process of finding the text that you want. But that's why you did the readability, so that you have a text that you want to use, hopefully, but you don't have to use that text. The other thing you're going to do, there's a journal article. It's in the discussion board. One of your requirements is to join the International Literacy Association, and you either sign up for the Reading Teacher or the Journal of Adolescent Literacy. You're going to pick one article. You can easily find an article in the archives that relates to your subject area. Give a brief summary of the article, talk about how it relates to your teaching, and make sure you cite the article as the basis for your discussion. So that is this week, but at this point, I'm going to show you a couple of read alouds so you get an idea how to do it. The first one I'll do is one that I've done in staff development. And I also did it when I was running the literacy program in the Sullivan West School District. So I am going to give you a new share. So hang on a second. Okay, first let me show you the graphic organizer. And again, you make this one up yourself. You'll see a few examples. But again, you're going to focus on using the gradual release framework. So as the one I'm doing is focusing on social studies. Actually, I think the ones I have pulled up today are all social studies, but it doesn't really matter. I will read the first part of the selection, and then I will stop after the first part and focus on an incident and what I feel the lesson is in that part of the text, and then relate it to myself. Now I'll show you other models where you can use a different graphic organizer. And then the next section, I would read it aloud also, but then I would elicit from the students as a guided aspect what they think the incident is, what they think the lesson is, and how it relates to them. And then what I have them do is I normally have them break into a paired reading, and they read to each other. And again, you can differentiate in the paired reading. You can do a high and low reader for support, or you can have lower readers together and higher readers together, and then provide scaffolding or different text if you need for some of the lower readers, however you want to do it. And they then assume responsibility for reading the text and completing the graphic organizer. And then if you want, you know, since in this case there's, I think 7 incidents, you could do like 3 or 4 of those, and then you could let them do individual application, independent application on their own if you want. So let me show you how I would do that, okay? And this one I did with, since there's some graphic language in here, this was done with high school, and it was also done with 8th graders, okay? If anybody's ever heard of Richard Wright, he's one of the great African-American authors in his day. And this was a unit that they were focusing on with Jim Crow laws and civil rights, segregation, and the whole bit. So I'm going to read through the first part with you and show you how I model doing that. And again, beforehand, I would have done some of the pre-learning activities to introduce themselves, and I'll also talk about front-loading of vocabulary, but I'll do that afterwards in the that's for next week, so that the students had some idea on how to do this and read it with some comprehension. I would also tell them that since this was written many years ago, some of the terms in here are not acceptable now, but this was an original, actually an original source document, so I'm going to read it as it is. So they would have some background on who Richard Wright was, and we would be focusing mainly on getting to the idea of Jim Crow laws. My first lesson on how to live as a Negro came when I was quite small. We were living in Arkansas. Our house stood behind the railroad track. Skippy yard was paved with black cinders. Nothing green ever grew in that yard. The only touch of green we could see was far away, beyond the tracks, over where the white folks lived. But cinders were good enough for me, and I never missed the green growing things. And anyhow, cinders were fine weapons. You could always have a nice hot war with huge black cinders, and all you had to do was crouch behind the brick pillars of the house with your hands full of gritty ammunition, and the first woolly black head you saw pop up from behind another row of pillars was your target. You tried your best to knock it off. It was great fun. I never fully realized the appalling disadvantages of the cinder environment till one day the gang to which I belonged found itself engaged in a hot war with the white boys who lived beyond the tracks. By the way, in terms of front loading of vocabulary, which I'll talk about afterwards, I might have focused on, I'll talk about vocabulary in context with a great term like appalling beforehand, or even bombardment or barrage, okay? As usual, we laid down our cinder barrage, thinking that this would wipe the white boys out, but they replied with a steady bombardment of broken bottles. We doubled our cinder barrage, but they hid behind the trees, hedges, and sloping embankments of their lawns. Having no such fortifications, we retreated to the brick pillars of our homes. During the retreat, a broken milk bottle caught me behind the ear, opening a deep gash, which bled profusely, another great term to focus on. The sight of blood pouring over my face completely demoralized our ranks. My fellow combatants left me standing paralyzed in the center of the yard and scurried for the home. A kind neighbor saw me and rushed me to a doctor, took 3 stitches in my neck. By the way, when students read this article, they totally know what Jim Crow laws are, by the way, by the time they're done. I sat brooding on my front steps, nursing my wound and waiting for my mother to come home from work. I felt that a grave injustice had been done me. It was all right to throw cinders. The greatest harm a cinder could do was leave a bruise. But broken bottles were dangerous. They left you cut, bleeding, and helpless. When night fell, my mother came from the white folks' kitchen. I raced down the street to meet her. I could just feel in my bones that she would understand. I knew she would tell me exactly what to do next time. I grabbed her hand and babbled out the whole story. She examined my wound. Then she slapped me. "How come you didn't hide?" she said. "How come you always fight?" I was outraged and bawled. Between sobs, I told her I didn't have any trees or hedges to hide behind. There wasn't a thing I could have used as a trench, and you couldn't throw very far when you were hiding behind the brick pillars of a house. She grabbed the barrel stave, dragged me home, stripped me naked, and beat me till I had a fever of 102. She would smack my rump with the stave, and while the skin was still spartan, impart to me the gems of Jim Crow wisdom. I was never to throw cinders at anymore. I was never to fight any more wars, and I would never, never under any conditions to fight white folks again. And they were absolutely right in clouding me with a broken milk bottle. Didn't I know she was working hard every day in the hot kitchens of the white folks to make money to take care of me? When was I ever going to learn to be a good boy? She couldn't be bothered with my fights. She finished by telling me that I ought to be thankful that God, as long as I lived, they didn't kill me. And I would stop right here because that really covers the first incident. And I would model writing in the incident, and I would say, well, what happened? Richard got into a fight with the white boys. He was hit with a bottle and needed 3 stitches. His mother took him home and beat him with a barrel stave. And if I wanted to, I could even, if I was focusing on some of the vocabulary words, and we're going to talk about deep processing vocabulary, I might even add in leaving him bleeding profusely. Great term. Lesson. Richard should never fight with the white boys. He was lucky they didn't kill him in those days. What would I do? Well, in those time and days, I would look for other ways to try to change the Jim Crow laws, as the white folks had all the power, and I could get killed if I didn't. Then I would, again, transfer responsibility. I'd read the next incident, get them to help me fill out. And again, they have this graphic organizer in front of them also, so they're filling it out as I'm doing it. And help me fill it out. And then I would transfer the responsibility to a paired reading where they would then do the reading together and complete the graphic organizer as you go. By the way, this would be a really great article also to use. I'm going to talk about close reading tonight. Now let me show you a graduate student's example at a lower level. Okay, since some of you work with elementary, we'll get to see an example at a lower level.
Hey everyone, so today we are continuing our social studies unit on China, and we're going to do a read aloud with this great book with great illustrations by Karen Jenner called Welcome to China. So this is on reading level 3, all right, which is perfect for our 3rd grade class. So I'll begin this book first by modeling, and then we're going to work in pairs, and then we will work alone. So how we're going to read this today is we're going to use a graphic organizer.
And I did use this as an example. The one thing that was missing when she did this is she went from the modeling to the collaborative work. She didn't do the guided aspect, which you folks are going to do. But because she did a good job in the other areas, I wanted you to see it.
Help us write down different new facts that we learned about China. So we're going to go through China today, Chinese history, and life in China. We're going to go up till page 24. So this is the graphic organizer that we're going to use today. So we have 3 columns: interesting facts, proof from text, and make a personal connection.
And what's really good about her graphic organizer as well is one of the key elements that students have trouble with is drawing conclusions or making observations and stuff like that, and then not citing evidence. So she was focusing on evidence, and it's always great for comprehension when they can relate it to themselves.
So we're going to find a fact, we're going to proof it from the text and write that down, and then we're going to say, how does this fact connect with me? What's a personal connection? So let's begin by reading the book. Welcome to China by Karen Jenner. China today. Welcome to China. This ancient nation is now home to more people than any other country.
And it's always good that the students have the text either visible to them or actually in front of them so they can follow along.
History. 1/5 of all the people in the world live here. That's a population of 1.3 billion people. 1 billion more than the United States. This is the Chinese flag, red with yellow stars. You should recognize that already. China is on the continent of Asia. It is one of the largest countries in the world with an area of 3.7 million square miles. The Chinese name for the country, Jianggu, means Middle Kingdom. So I'm going to stop here, and I want to go to my graphic organizer, and I want to fill out an interesting fact that I learned. So one thing that stuck out to me is the huge amount of people that China has living in its country. So China has, we're going to put by interesting fact, that China has 1.3 billion people in the country, because that stood out to me. And let's go back to the book. So where do we see that fact? So it was on the first page, page 4. And here it says, that's a population of 1.3 billion. So we're going to write that in our graphic organizer by proof from text. Now what's a personal connection we can make? So when I was thinking of 1.3 billion, so I live in New York, which is in the United States, which has many, many, many people in it. However, it is way less than China has in its country. So that's a personal connection. I live in a country that has way less people than China. Let's continue reading. Most people in China live along the crowded east coast or near the Yangtze River. Both the Yangtze and the Yellow River cut across China, flowing eastward to the ocean. The rest of the country is mainly covered in deserts, mountains, and highlands. Fewer people live in those areas. The rocky Gobi Desert lies to the north. In the west, there are many mountains, including the world's tallest mountain, Mount Everest. Southern China has an unusual mountain landscape called karst, with spectacular caves and rock formations. So I want to stop here because an interesting fact that stuck out to me is that Mount Everest is in China. So I want to write that on my graphic organizer. So we're going to write by interesting fact, Mount Everest is located in China, and the proof from text, how do we know that? Because in the book, it says, in the west, there are many mountains, including the world's tallest Mount Everest. And what's a personal connection that I have with Mount Everest? So a personal connection.
So again, she should be eliciting from the students at this point, or in the next section if she wanted to do 2 sections of modeling. And then, again, she's then transferring responsibility for the reading and completing the graphic organizers to a collaborative work where the students are working. In her case, she had them working in 2, but you may decide you want them working in 2 with groups of 3 or whatever. Okay? So at this point, I'll ask anybody if anybody has any questions about how to do the read aloud. I think it's pretty clear, but now's a good time to ask if you have any questions.
I do actually have a few, just brief ones.
Go ahead.
I posted some of the read aloud work already because I actually thought it was due today. And so I just need to redo my read aloud. But for the graphic organizer, you provided a template. It was, instead of this section, it wasn't like the Jim Crow one. It was 2 columns with a question and then an answer, which referred to our plan for the read aloud and the pre-learning activity and the engagement activity and the group work. Are we submitting that as well this week?
Don't have to.
Okay.
Okay, good question though.
Thank you.
All right. So now I'm going to move to the next week. And vocabulary is a good focus for everybody, no matter what you're teaching. There are really great articles here. Marzano's article on 6 steps to better vocabulary instruction is fabulous, and what's important to know about vocabulary is great. If you're interested in learning about morphology, focusing on teaching roots and prefixes, that's a great article. The PowerPoint I'm going to show you is up here, and the model that I have here, I focused on a science basis. So just to make it clear, this is vocabulary in context is not a lesson. I'll change that. All you're doing is submitting the model, which I'll show you, the worksheet. You're going to do a deep process of vocabulary lesson, and then if you go to the discussion board, there is a discussion on vocabulary. Okay? And I always have you cite one of the articles as a basis for your discussion, because I think the articles are so essential that it's a way of ensuring that you're going to at least read through those. So let me show you what it looks like. Hang on a minute. And I'm going to give you the research base for this too. But just to give you a little perspective, and I'm going to unmute you all. Students often come into text and they really don't know some of the text, and they definitely don't know some of the terms, especially when you focus on content areas. So I'm going to give you guys a vocabulary quiz of some key terms. Anybody know the meaning of these terms?
No.
No idea.
No.
Who are you students for that when they come across some of your text? All right. We'll give you the definition. Okay, let me move this out of the way. All right, I just use that as a model to show you guys how your students often feel when they're reading some of the text. But let's look at some of the, see what your perception is. True or false? Knowledge of vocabulary affects comprehension. What do you guys think?
True.
True.
Yeah, and this goes way back to the National Reading Panel report and the latest work by John Hattie. John Hattie has a compilation of thousands and thousands of studies, and it correlates with what is effective teaching, and this is one of the higher ones, but we'll talk some of that later. A reader needs to know every word in a selection. Selection.
Come and take a little bit. Come here. Come here.
I see every word, not necessarily, but at least to have a good range of words.
Exactly, because sometimes the selections may have words that we're going to talk about it are not essential for these selections, or there may be too many words. We're going to talk about some of the factors in that. The most effective way to teach vocabulary is through memorization.
False.
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 But memorization could be part.
It
I
could
know.
be.
Could be.
But, you know, I'm going to bring you way back when I was taking the SATs and I was preparing for them. And I wanted to, you know, vocabulary was a big part of that. And I wanted to do well. How do? We made flashcards. Now I know that it was probably the least effective method, because we're going to focus on what's called deep processing of vocabulary. Let's look at number 5. Many encounters with a new word are necessary if vocabulary instruction is to have a measurable effect on reading comprehension.
Many encounter with a new word.
True.
That is true, yes.
Okay, that is what deep processing of vocabulary is. That's the actual definition of it. That's what you're going to be focusing on. And let's just look at number 9. Learning a word in context will ensure its retention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
You know what? I'll tell you the truth. It could, but it won't guarantee it. It's definitely an effective strategy, but that doesn't mean they'll necessarily deep process it. So we're going to focus on more than just using context. But we're going to do both. Okay. Now, one of the leading researchers in the field of vocabulary is William Nagy, and he was talking here about problems students have and reasons for vocabulary failure. And he says students have a lack of in-depth word knowledge. But sometimes the definitions for the terms may be hard to understand. And you could see that, how many times the students go to the dictionary and definitions are just as hard as the word they're getting. And even with the new online books, when you buy these programs and stuff like that, they have a glossary right there. That doesn't mean the students can understand the actual definition in the glossary. They'll have to know which definition. There could be 4 or 5 definitions for a word, so it has different shades of meaning. And some definitions will not convey a new concept in the depth if you're into like a really heavy biology or something like that. And sometimes context really can help. But look at number 1 there. May not supply adequate information in some cases. Mary was thin, her sister was obese. Does that mean her sister was way too thin?
Oh my goodness.
Or the opposite, right? Without the more information, that's not enough. So a single context will not be adequate sometimes for a new concept. Difficult text will certainly hinder the acquisition of new vocabulary. So we're going to really talk about ways to make that work. Now, the International Reading Association came out with a recommendation, so this is your research phase. We really want to integrate a comprehensive word study phonics program into reading, writing instruction, and that goes across all content. Vocabulary knowledge is an important part of reading comprehension, and good vocabulary instruction involves children, and here's the key word, actively involved in learning new word meanings, as well as relating words to context and other known words. Teaching about words, like including morphology, roots, prefixes, will help students' comprehension. And David Pearson, who's the head of the graduate program at Stanford University in literacy, established the Sierra Institute and did a lot of great research. And they provided the idea that effective vocabulary instruction provides exposure to different meanings of words. I'm going to show you examples of that. Helps students think new and familiar meanings of words, provides illustrations of word usage, and the articles you're going to read are going to talk about that. Builds conceptual and semantic foundations for word knowledge, builds understanding of word family members, and the use of context. Now, the National Reading Panel report, which was a compilation of all the studies in the area, in this case of vocabulary, with 50 or more participants, and they drew conclusions based on that, have these recommendations. Vocabulary instruction leads to gains in comprehension, but of course the method must be appropriate to the age and the ability of the reader. The easy words for more difficult words in text help facilitate comprehension for low-achieving students. I'm going to show you examples of it. Combining techniques is most effective, and here are some great strategies. Question asking, metacognitive mapping, cooperative grouping, story mapping, graphic organizers, and combining them really is very effective. And the summation of the National Reading Panel report. The study's reviews suggest that vocabulary instruction does lead to gains in comprehension, but the methods must be appropriate for the age and ability of students. The use of computers in vocabulary instruction was found to be more effective than some traditional methods in a few studies. It is clearly emerging as a potential valuable aid in classroom teachers in the area of vocabulary instruction, and I'm going to show you some examples of this. Learning words before reading a text, it should be just a text, also is helpful. That's called front loading. We're going to talk about that. Techniques such as task restructuring, repeated exposure, including having the student encounter the words in various contexts, appear to enhance vocabulary development. In addition, substituting easy words for more difficult words can assist low-achieving students. For example, when I was reading the Jim Crow laws, if I was focusing on a word, like let's say I really wanted to focus on profusely, when I was reading that passage, I might actually add in or change some of the other words so that they don't have to focus on too many difficult terms in there. So I might give a bombardment and then in parentheses put what bombardment means in terms that they could understand. So you can modify the text where you need to. Now, which words do we teach? Well, sight words you're really focusing on for your younger students and your struggling readers. We're going to see some examples of high utility words. These are tier 2 words. And tier 3 would be those that are very specific, and a lot of you guys have that because you teach very specific subject areas. So let's see some examples. These are sight words: over, under, before, see, how, where, when, want, take, eat, etc. High utility words are words that you're going to find across many contents or contexts. Theory, you can see that in science, you can see it in social studies, you can see it in just reading ELA text. Process, definitely. Saturated for high school can be saturated population, can be saturated in science. Analyze, any of your state assessment terms.
Whoa. Malachi, you okay?
Okay.
Gotta keep going, okay?
Yeah, let me just mute you guys until we need you all again. Okay. Tier 3 words, those are words that the students may not have to remember. And again, it depends on your text. It depends on your curriculum. For example, if you're studying World War II, blitzkrieg is a great term, but is that something that they really have to deep process? Pigmentation, infrared. But those are decisions you guys have to make. And as I said, all of these terms are tier 2 words. What good is it if you're teaching all the students the key vocabulary in your content area, they really learn and stuff like that, then you give them a test or they take a state assessment, and they really don't know what enumerate means. So they can't show their knowledge in a case like that. Now let me show you. Now, the first assignment that you're going to do, and we're going to call this a front-loading assignment, you're going to do what's called a vocabulary in context. And one of the key factors in improving students' comprehension is when they read a text more than once. And you're going to see Doug Fisher talking about that. So in essence, it will be a little bit of a close reading in this sense. But what I have students do is actually pull out from the text the key terms in a context, and they do it before the reading, front loading, and they focus on learning the words in the context and learning the clues. So let me show you an example of one that I created for my study that I did. Okay, and it's also available in the week. Okay, so we're going to do this, and I'm going to do this. This is what you have to create, something like this for your vocabulary and context. This is before the reading. So I'm taking out from the text the difficult terms that they're going to come across before they read it. So I'm building background knowledge, front loading. We're also focusing on learning how to use the context clues, which is a valuable skill for them to learn. So we go through the gradual release with them. I would read the first one, model what germinate means, and I would write down the clues for them. Then I would go to the second one, and this was done for third graders, and I would elicit from them what they think. And then I would go to the collaborative work and have them work on the next couple on their own. Again, these are key terms. I'm front loading it. This is before they're reading the actual text. All you have to do for that assignment is create something like this from your text. That's the vocabulary and context. You do not need a lesson for that.
So all of these paragraphs or short sentences, they're coming from the actual text that you're going to use.
Right.
And then you
exactly.
put questions under it.
And I might have even modified the text a little bit if I didn't think the context was adequate.
Got it. Thank you.
If I didn't think the clues were good, you have the right to modify the text. But think about, one, you're front loading the vocabulary. Two, it's going to increase their comprehension, because all the studies show that if a student reads material more than once, the comprehension is going to vastly increase. So you really, and you're teaching them the skill of using context clues. So this is a very valuable activity to do with them. Now let's go back to the PowerPoint. There are different ways you can do this, by the way. I'll show you one that I did. I wrote a virtual adventure on slavery to the students. And notice here that this way, I didn't give them the term. I asked them to find the term that people were upset and angry, but they still had to give the clues. Okay? So the sudden states were inflamed. Okay? Now, if I felt that, gee, I really wanted to focus more on abolitionists, I might modify the text here, flamed or upset. I could modify the text so some of the other difficult terms are not hard for them. Or if I didn't want, I didn't want them to have to be confused by the fugitive slave law, I might explain what that was and put it right here. Okay? So you can modify the text that way. Let me show you another example. Example here, okay? I focused on turmoil, okay? But let's say I have a lot of low readers and they might not know what barbarity is. So you cannot stand the barbarity or cruelty of the attack, okay? Or I might give them what an overseer is, okay? So you can modify the text so you're focusing on the term you want, or I might want to focus on overseer and then give them what turmoil means, right? So that is, all you have to do is create that for your vocabulary and context. The same terms that you focus on for the vocabulary and context are the terms you're now going to develop a lesson on for deep processing. And again, to do the deep processing, you're going to use the gradual release framework. And as you read through the articles, you'll see, and we talked about one of the best ways to do it is use a graphic organizer. So I'm going to show you an example. Again, I would model using a graphic organizer where the students are working with the words in many different frameworks, and then go through the gradual release framework. And this was one that a student actually created. Notice that they had to find a sentence with it. They had to get a definition for the term. Again, using pictures, visuals was one of the recommended ways. So they did that and related it to themselves. So now they're working with the term in many different contexts. They're using visuals, they're relating it to themselves. That's a great strategy. So you can decide, gee, I want to have them develop graphic organizers for those terms. So you're going to make the template, you have the lesson plan, and you'll model the first one. Another one, this goes along with the one you just saw. Notice here, building word families or expanding the term in terms of other terms that mean the same. In this one, I had students working with a thesaurus. So you may want to do something like that. But visuals are a real key. Now, in terms of technology, you can focus on having them do this on the computer. I did this with, I did staff development in schools, and the schools that purchased for the younger grades, Kidspiration, and for the older grades, Inspiration, if you've ever used it. Really bang for the buck, best program you could ever buy for your class. But if you do it, you make the template, you don't put this stuff in. So you make the template with the word in the middle, and you put in the lines, and you put in what they have to do with it. You let them create the bubbles, and then they're going to do the sentence, the picture, the caption, what it relates to them. But again, if you do that, one of the real keys, and I learned that the first time I did it, is they can't do any of the bells and whistles until they've done the meat. Otherwise, they spend all the time making pretty bubbles, nice colors, pictures, and all those type of things. So that comes at the end. Here's another one. They were doing they're doing a study on an immigration book. So the students had to come up with one word to describe two characters. This was on immigration. The father is Irish immigration, and the overseer, in this case, Plunkett. And they described Plunkett as mean and the father as quiet, and then they had to use a thesaurus to find other words that mean that. That's expanding their vocabulary base. Nice, you could do something like that if you want. You might want to do something like this. Notice how many different frameworks they're working with the one-term overseer. Will they have deep processing of overseer when they're done? You can bet on it. Now, you may really want to have a great engagement activity with the students. And we're going to do some cartoons later where the students get to work with cartoons. But this was created, I developed a literacy ELA course for the 11th grade for the Las Vegas online schools. And one of the words that they had to look up was ablution. And the student created this. And I thought this showed deep processing of that term. They would really understand what ablution is. And I'll show you one that was created by another student when I was doing staff development. And I used Toondo. Toondo is absolutely great if you've ever used that online. Did that student have a deep understanding of what a liberator was? I thought it had great sense, plus a little bit of humor. And here's another one you could do. I did this also with the Las Vegas Online. We focused on morphology, the root DIC. They had to look up what it meant. Then they had to give two terms with positive connotations and two with negative connotations. And look how they're not only, there's a higher order thinking skills they're really working with here. Plus they're learning what positive and negative connotations are. And they had to relate it to themselves. Deep processing of vocabulary. Great strategy. You might want to use this also instead. This is called the vocabulary continuum. So the student had to come up with a term and find the opposites, and then they used the thesaurus, and they could use pictures to come up with the hottest to the coldest. This was for middle school, and I thought that the use of the cartoon was showed some good humor there by that student. Your bibliography, Beck and McKeon, I actually had them speak on vocabulary when I coordinated the New York State Reading Conference a bunch of years ago. My focus for the conference, again, was literacy in all curricular areas, but they wrote the book on deep processing of vocabulary. This is a great article here, and the reading teacher, when you sign up for it, you can access that if you want. Nagy, you just saw that, and you can also access this article. I mentioned E. David Pearson before, and Afridi Hebert is amazing on vocabulary assessment and stuff like that. So let me go back to the course. So you're just gonna do the vocabulary and context activity sheet, perhaps just a vocabulary lesson, which is talking about using the gradual release responsibility and how you're going to develop it. Are they going to do a graphic organizer? Are they going to create cartoons with a model? And then you have the discussion thread on vocabulary. Okay, I think I covered it pretty well, but take any questions anybody might have at this point.
I have a quick one.
Go for it.
So, as someone who's going to be teaching math through 7 to 12, a lot of the trouble that I've had with my texts is that a lot of the available texts for that age group are a lot drier. I've found texts for younger age groups that I've been reappropriating for older groups, but they're not necessarily always appropriate. Some of the words are too simple. Some of it almost feels like I would be patronizing my students. Do you have any advice?
Well, you can use a higher text for just one part of your unit.
Okay.
You can use an article that relates to it that has some tougher text. Or in your case, you can actually take the text from the book and rewrite a section of it and come up with more difficult fonts. You can upgrade it.
Could my read aloud then be more flexible, like more like cherry picking sections to read to get the point across?
As long as you're transferring responsibility and using a graphic organizer and they're building comprehension, you can go any way you want with that.
All right, thank you very much.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to go to the next week. Now this can be a little bit harder for you in the sense that you've really got to try and find a primary source document, okay? But I've had students in teaching this course prior that you find a primary source document that's related to your unit. It may be something written years ago, something on a mathematical basis or science basis, or read the work of Darwin or something like that, or anything. You could even come up, focus on actual law that's written that focuses on your area, anything along the way that you want. And you're going to do what's called a deep reading or close reading. And there's no better way to explain what close reading is if you're not familiar with it than to hear what Doug Fisher has to say. So I'm going to play his point on this. He gives a really great background and understanding on what it is.
Look at what it means to do analytic reading, close analytic reading, or now just close reading. The first thing is we start with a short passage. We do not closely read the Odyssey. It's too big for a close reading. We read short passages. They tend to, in science and social studies especially, they tend to be primary source documents that we read closely. Things that are complex and worthy. Short passages. I always get asked how short, I don't know, 3 paragraphs maybe, up to 3 pages maybe.
So what you're going to do, and I'll show you a model of this, is you're going to actually videotape yourself doing a close reading, modeling doing it, just so you're prepared for this. But again, the text has to be worthy. That's one of the primary considerations.
We're going to have a short passage. That doesn't mean that the text has to be a standalone piece of text. It could be a close reading inside a longer text. You just want to pick the part of the text that's really worthy of this level of scrutiny and discussion.
I had one student who was doing a unit on the Civil War and wanted to close read a section of the Emancipation Proclamation, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. But if you do a readability on the Emancipation Proclamation, it's probably 13, 14, 15 level, something like that. So he actually took it out and rewrote it, making it a little bit simpler, but still making it a worthy text. So you have the right to do that as well.
For example, we read Night not too long ago. There are a couple of places in Night where you want to slow down and go really deep into conversations. And there are other places in Night where in their book clubs, they can handle it. I don't have to teach it all. You have to be strategic about what you pick. We're going to pick a short passage because we're going to do a lot of repeated readings. We're going to have kids in a close read over and over and over. And you know our students love to do this, right? They can't wait to sign up for rereading. We have to trick them into rereading by changing the purpose and changing the questions. The questions we ask should drive them back into the text. And the questions should be interesting enough that they want to talk about it. We have known for more than 40 years that repeated reading improves comprehension. You all know that, right? We've known this 40 years, not new. If you get kids, any of us, ourselves included, you get us to read again, we are likely to understand it better. And again, and again, and again. Problem is we haven't figured out a good way to get this to happen. Because none of us like to reread unless we change the purpose or change the question.
So even though when you're doing your vocabulary base, the fact that you're pulling it out as a vocabulary and context beforehand, you're actually doing a little bit of close reading there also. Because the students are now reading the text for more than once and for more than one purpose. The first time they're reading some of the text for just the vocabulary and context, then they're going to be going into the text for comprehension.
Third thing, we read with a pencil. I really wish we would read with a pencil, but I still think we read with pens and stylus and everything else. If you go back to the first strong work that I could find on annotation, it's 1940. Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book. It is a fantastic piece about teaching annotation skills. Now, I assume that none of you were teachers in 1940 when this book came out. Nope, no hands. Okay, so we weren't teachers in 1940, and I think we lost this. I think we forgot this. And I would be willing to bet, for those of you, if I could go find your personal libraries, the professional books you read, I would see writing in your books. We all know that you engage in another way when you write on the text. We underline, we highlight, we write margin notes. We do that all the time. And I think we have forgotten to teach our students that. I feel really bad about that. I write in all of my books. I write in journal articles. I write on everything.
Before he came out with the close reading, and he really was the forefather of doing all this, I remember I used to do staff development in a lot of New York City schools. And one of the things I actually realized I had them doing was close reading. We had text for them that they uploaded into the computers, because I was doing technology, literacy, staff development, and I had them using the comment tools. So I was and highlighters. So I actually had them do, this is going back, 10, 11, 12 years ago.
Because that's how I remember it. And in my career, I have never thought to teach students annotation until the last year and a half. And I feel bad about that, because I know for me, annotation works really well. And I just never thought that I should have my students do it, mostly because we have textbooks and they can't write in them. That's most of it. And I know that annotation, reading with a pencil, causes a lot of problems, especially for administrators, because they don't like the photocopy bill. You know that, right? All the photocopy costs go up. So promise me, if you start doing annotation with primary source documents, that you stop photocopying shut-up sheets. The dumb worksheets, right? Photocopy primary source documents and stop copying all the dumb worksheets. And then we'll balance out the photocopy bill. Then we can write on all the papers we want.
And I've worked with teachers, and what they'll do is when they're going to do a close reading in a school, and they have a text or something, it doesn't have to be a primary source document. They may actually photocopy out of their textbook, because they have textbooks in the classroom, and then the students can write on it. So that's another way to do it.
Oh, there you go. So in our work in the last year and a half, I started thinking about, this is the first time I've really ever thought about this, how did I start learning annotation skills? How'd that happen for me? And I really started thinking about it, because I cannot remember in elementary school, middle school, or high school ever writing on a piece of text. I cannot remember a single time in school, but I remember very clearly writing on a text in my first year at San Diego State as an undergraduate. And here's what I remember. Now, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but here's what I remember. My college roommate and I had one class together, abnormal psychology. He was passing, I was not. So we were studying, which I don't know that actually was studying, and he would take a ruler in this big, thick abnormal psychology book. He would take a ruler and he would run the ruler down the page. He had a pen in his hand, and every once in a while he would underline and he would write a note. And he'd drag the ruler down the page as he studied and read. Me, I'm just kind of reading along. So about halfway through the semester, because I'm failing, I decide I'm going to do that. And it slowed my reading down, and I started passing abnormal psychology. The next semester, I went to the bookstore to buy used books. Not because I'm cheap, although I am. Not because I'm cheap. I would go to the used books section of San Diego State's bookstore, and I would do the little Goldilocks thing with the used book, and you'd pick them up and you'd flip the book. Hey, this person didn't write anything in this book. This person didn't even read this book, right? Then I pick up this one. Uh-oh, this person's highlighter blew up on this book, right? It's there. Look, this one's just right. That's the one for me. And I recognize now, I didn't recognize it then, that because I bought used books with previous highlighting and underlining in them, I was having a conversation with the author and the previous reader. I recognize that now, because I know that there were times where I disagreed with the underlining or the margin note. I'd scratch it out. And I'd underline the part I liked. I'd write my own margin note.
One of the other reasons I really like close reading, the students, when they're doing it, either when they're using a graphic organizer, when to read aloud, and then using that for comprehension or doing this, they have to be actively engaged in the reading process because they're either filling out a graphic organizer or they're annotating by using highlighters and pencils and stuff like that. And that's a great factor in improving comprehension.
I recognize that now. That's how I became successful in college, because I essentially taught myself how to do this. And again, I'm embarrassed that in all these years, I've never taught students to do this, even though I recognize that it's a huge part of my success. So we've been working on this for about 1.5 years now, getting kids to do annotations on text. It's yes, the photocopy problem, and yes, the copyright problem. So we don't want to violate copyright, so we have to think about what's fair use and what's public domain. For those of you who work in secondary schools, there's a Gutenberg project.
Yeah, if you guys photocopy the Declaration of Independence or something like that, I don't think anybody's ever going to come after you.
It's a website that has collected texts that are in the public domain for free. Huge searchable database that's awesome for us. It's got science texts and social studies texts and literature and poetry. Awesome project for us to have access to free text that kids can write on. If you don't know this, Robert Frost's stuff went in the public domain last November. Do you all know that? Here's my prediction. If I know that, I suspect most of the test makers know that. If I were on the test generation side of this, and this is the first year we didn't have to pay permissions for Robert Frost poems, you'd see them all over middle school and high school. Maybe not the most obvious road not taken, but a lot of them, because there's no fee now. Now, if you want to save money on the test generation side, and we haven't tested Robert Frost in a while, so those of you now are like, okay, high school exit exam is in 9 days, so you have to run back and teach Robert Frost really fast. CSTs are a while off yet sometime. We're going to get kids to write on the text. We have to not just have them highlight everything. We need to teach them a system of annotation. If you want to do Google Books and you go on Google Books, you can find Mortimer Adler's book, How to Read a Book, and read his annotation section. Essentially, they say, underline main ideas. Could you right now spend an entire year teaching kids to underline main ideas? Because they don't know what the main ideas are. And what do they do when you first put a pen or a pencil or a highlighter in their hand? It's like they read along with a pencil. Oh, yep, I got that too. Yep, right. So we had to teach that. We teach our students to circle confusing words and phrases. I think that's a really important message. Circle words and phrases that are confusing, because the teacher takes a copy of the text, a little bit bigger version of it, like blown up a little bit on a clipboard, and we walk around and we mark where on our version kids have circled.
That's a great formative assessment, because now you're going along and you're seeing where the students are having trouble, and there's your focus for instruction or RTI, whatever you want.
So we look at trends for confusing parts. Oh, look, everybody in here has marked this part of the text. I better do some modeling because they're not getting this part. It's a great formative assessment. When you have your copy of the text and you just walk around and mark, tick marks by the words that they're circling. We also have them write question marks and write questions in the margins. And as they get better and better at this, we have them write numbers in the margins when authors have enumerated points. So the author says first, second, third, we have them write the number in the margin and write what the first point is in their own words. As they get better and better, we can add exclamation marks, we can add examples. We have to get them a habit that they take with them in terms of annotation. I don't know how you do close reading without having kids write on the text. Because the point of close reading is to have evidence that you can use in your discussions.
By the way, I've also saw one teacher put an overlay over a text and have them annotate on that.
And in your writing. And students don't tend to use evidence in their writing if they have to go back and reread it again. If they've already marked the text, they use evidence because they can quickly find their evidence. So I don't know how to do close reading without it.
And I know a lot of you are upper level high school teachers, and you know that what is the main focus, passing Regents exams and stuff like that. And boy, are they always looking for students to be able to cite evidence and stuff like that. So this is a great strategy for that.
Without teaching kids annotation. The next factor of close reading is called text-dependent questions. We're going to give more examples of this. These are questions that can only be answered with evidence from the text. There's a fair amount of criticism about this because we run the risk of asking all recall, low-level regurgitation questions. That doesn't have to be that way, but we run the risk of that.
By the way, the highest correlation with student success on state assessments for ELA and stuff like that is student success on higher level thinking skills.
And so a lot of people who are worrying about Common Core are worried that all the questions we ask kids will be just right there kinds of questions and no thinking. So I want to show you some work on text-dependent questions so we can get a little better and get past that. And the last thing I want to talk about for close reading is that the point of close reading is that students should struggle a bit. We need to return that struggle to school. I did not say planned failure. I did not say, putting your hood up and weeping on the table. But struggle, that it should be worthy, that it shouldn't give up the answer really quickly. You have to work on it. Let's look at what it means to do analytic reading, close analytic reading.
Let me show you an example done by a student. So you get an idea. And again, this is all you got to do, create a video like this.
So today I'm going to take you through 3 different assignments that are all interconnected.
So because she talks slow, I have the closed captioning on.
What you're going to be doing is a close reading on a New York Times article. First step is to go to assignment number 1. So we'll click here. This is going to give you instructions more deeply. We'll go to the article in a minute, but the first thing that you want to notice is the annotation grid, which is down here. And it guides you through how you need to annotate the article. So please review that. And what I'm asking you to do up here, you're going to read the article through one time. Just read it through. Try to get the understanding, gist of things, the main idea, what's going on, involved, etc. So that's just your first time reading. The second time is when we're actually going to do some annotation. Dive in a little bit deeper. Now you're familiar with the article and you have an understanding of it to an extent. Now's the time to go deeper into it. So you can follow this guide.
So this is a original source document because it was a New York Times article from years and years ago. Notice that she's got multiple readings for different purposes. So it's a worthy text, it's a original source document, and multiple readings for different purposes and the use of annotation.
I have the article available to you here in Google Docs, or you can annotate it on paper. It's your choice. Use this as your guide. Highlight your key ideas that you see in yellow. Go through the article. See, this seems like a key idea. Maybe highlight this here. And anything that strikes you as interesting or description, do that in blue. What confuses you? Highlight that in pink. And then finally, find things that you don't understand, that keep you questioning, highlight that in green. Then go back and make at least 3 comments about your highlights within the article. So let me show you an example of one of these. Here is the actual article from the New York Times. I have it in Microsoft Word. You can use it in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. This is the title, Discrimination in Housing Against Non-Whites Persists Quietly, U.S. Studies Finds. You can even highlight that if you wanted to. So you can go and highlight the title, and you can pick the colors, use the colors that we have pre-suggested, and you can say, well, what do you think? And over here, you can insert comments. So the title itself. So maybe while you're annotating it, you're not really exactly sure what point of the article is. So you're going to insert a comment there. I also have another example where I highlighted it in the first paragraph. First paragraph says, discrimination against Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians looking for housing persists in subtle forms, according to a new national study commissioned by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. Though less likely to face overt obstacles, like being refused an appointment to see a home, minority customers who were shown fewer available units than whites, similar qualifications, study found. And I highlighted that in yellow because I thought that was an interesting idea. And then I made a comment. In the past, people knew they were being discriminated against, but now it's hard to prove. So that's an important point in the article. So you might want to also notice difficult words, and if you don't know what overt means, highlight that and then come back to it and insert another comment about what the meaning is. So your job after you do the read through once is to come back again and do the read through, marking up the text. Again, you can do this online like I just demonstrated, or you can do this on paper, choice of course. Now let's go to the second assignment. This is going to be using a double entry chart on this article. So
This is a very advanced one that was submitted, but it's good to see a really high quality one, this whole thing.
click on our assignment here. After you have read and completed 2 readings of the Housing Discrimination Persists article and completed your first round of annotations, we're going to go even a little bit deeper and find specific areas to examine and discuss. And we're going to use the double entry journal chart to do that. Here's an example. Now, again, you have gone through reading at least twice. This will be a 3rd time. I know it's a little overkill, but trust me, you're going to become a great reader once you do this. So now, going back to the original article, we're going to start pulling out direct quotations that you feel are important, okay, or interesting. And we're going to copy and paste them here. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to extend your response. And you're going to explain or comment or even have some questions. So going back.
Notice how they're now reading the text 3 times, different purposes.
Back to what we were highlighting in the article, I copy and pasted quotation. It says, though less likely to face overt obstacles like being refused an appointment to see a home, minority customers were shown fewer available units than whites in their qualifications. Study found. Well, I already made some comments about that, and here I'm going to extend my comments a little bit further. This is subtle discrimination. People may think or believe they're being discriminated against, but this may be hard to prove. What can one do about this? And so your job is to continue with this close reading. Go back into the text and see what you have highlighted. See what comments you have made. Take those quotations, paste them here, and extend your response. Extend your questioning. Extend your observations. And then we'll have really deep reading of this article. We're not done. One more thing to do. Now we're going to go back to assignment 3. Here is where you're really going to prove that you have a deep understanding of the article. There are 4 questions here, and all of them are asking you to go back to the text and find the answers within the text. I'm asking you to work in pairs for this one because it's probably going to be a really in-depth kind of assignment for you to do, and 2 heads thinking together is always a good idea. So now you have your individual annotations, you have your little entry journal, and now working.
Because they've done all the annotations, students can really handle these higher order thinking skills, and they have evidence they can easily do.
Partner, you have these questions that are text dependent, and you're going to get together with all of your notes, and you're going to answer these questions. For example, the first one asks, what forms of housing discrimination exist today? According to a recent study discussed in the article, you will have to go back into the article and find where they're talking about this. And secondly, how has housing discrimination changed since 1977? Again, the answers are within the article. What justifications do you think people use to defend and continue such practices? There's answers within the article. So it's not only just going to be your opinion. You're going back into the article and you're saying, this is what the article is saying. And so in that way, it shows that you have read deeply and that you have a real mastery over reading. And you're going to continue that for a total of 4 questions, and of course, submitted here. So hopefully this overview is giving you an idea.
I think that gives you a good idea. I do want to show you briefly one more thing before we cut it for the night. In the site where Doug Fisher talks, they've got a lot of great videos and stuff. It goes along with the accompanying videos that go along with his book on rigorous reading. And in chapter 3, they've got some real great, and I'll make sure you get the link, close reading models. And I'll show you what one looks like. This is a high school advanced course on this. Okay, so let me get this set up for you. There's the American history one.
Used the government and called on citizens to get America out of the Great Depression. Anybody have any questions on that part of the purpose? So kind of like a 2-parter there. How FDR used the government and called on the citizens, like all of us, to get us out of the Great Depression. Language purpose, we're going to be throwing this around. Interdependence. How we are dependent upon each other. And then finally, socially, That's why we're all sitting in groups of 4 today, our social purpose. You'll be working as a table group to discuss and interpret FDR's 1933 inaugural speech. The way
That's a worthy text, guys.
we will be doing this, tackling this purpose, is a close reading. We're going to be looking at, again, FDR's speech, inaugural speech from 1933. We know what inauguration is. It's like the first day you're president, you're sworn in. It's a big celebration. So we're going to be looking at the speech that FDR gave to the citizens. And I'm trying to put myself in that place where people are going through the Great Depression. They're worried about losing their house, worried about their next meal, worried about whether or not they're going to be able to find another job, and what he says to the American people. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. With your pen or pencil, when you're reading FDR's speech, underline major points using pen or pencil. So one of my questions for you is going to be, what was FDR's message? What was he saying to the American people? If you feel like you found that in the speech on one of your reads, underline where he makes major points, okay? Now we're gonna go to the pink or orange highlighter. Circle key words or phrases in pink or orange, whichever one you get. And then off to the margin, you can say what's confusing about it, or do you just need the definition? You can do that. With the yellow marker, use it to make a question mark. If something's confusing, highlight that line or two. And then off to the margin, write why is it confusing? You know, what is he talking about? What is FDR referring to? You can write yourself a note to that. And then finally, if something surprises you, kind of throws you off or something, you can use an exclamation mark to.
You don't have to use all of these notations. You can just pick 2 or 3 if you want, however you want to do it.
Annotate the speech. You may or may not annotate on this first read. It's up to you, whichever is more comfortable. But I just wanted to show this, what one of your classmates did. You can see that she's got some underlining, some highlighting of words. And then in the margin, she definitely used that margin to write notes to herself. There's like some bullet points. She's got some brackets. So this is what your paper might look like toward the end of our reading when you have all the annotation notes. So, in less than 5 sentences, state FDR's message.
So after they've annotated, they now have going back, and they're going to come up with a text-dependent question.
Would you say what his message was?
I said he reassures his audience of the truth and what is going on, and he lets them know that he's aware of what we expect from them, and he wants to move forward with his people.
Let's move forward with his people. Okay, what'd you say, Decca?
But he has a promise, and he will he has a plan, and he will do all his power to fix this problem.
Okay. He has a plan. I like that. Where in the text did you find that? Where in the speech did you find he has a plan? Maybe if you had to find the number, how we number this, what number would you say you found that, Decca?
Number 1.
Number 1? Okay, what part does he say? As you listen to this second read, consider this question. What specifically does FDR tell Americans what the government will do to help them through the Great Depression? After we've just finished the second read, I want to remind you really quickly of the purpose of today. It's right here. To learn how FDR used the government to get America out of the Great Depression. It's 2 parts, but on this first part, to learn how he used the government, that's what this first question, which I wanted you guys to discuss after your second read, has to deal with. What specifically does FDR tell Americans the government will do to help them get through the Great Depression? So in just a moment, speak at your table, see what you found after your second read. Remember, when you talk to each other, use the evidence from the text, from the speech. Where did you find the evidence?
Like I say, that's exemplary, or Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry would not put that up in connection with the book that they wrote. But there's a lot of great things going on there. as you could see, in terms of multiple reads, different purposes, higher order thinking skills, great use of annotations. He's going around doing formative assessments with them, higher order thinking skills. Just really, really great stuff. But anyway, that pretty well covers everything for the next couple of weeks. You got some great readings to do with it, and you just have to submit just the video of you modeling and showing how you're going to do the close reading and model doing it a little bit, and how you're going to use the annotations. And that pretty well covers the next couple of weeks. These are great skills to be able to use with your teaching. Administrators love to see this type of stuff. It will help your students read and comprehend. It will help them learn more difficult concepts. They get the higher order thinking skills as we get in state assessments. High quality teaching. Anybody have any questions at this point?
I know when I was doing the read aloud, when I was planning the read aloud, I wanted to do a close reading of the read aloud before we did the Zoom meeting. So should I continue to do the read aloud for the close reading activity, or should I just do it separately?
Well, your close reading, you really want a primary source document.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. If you have trouble finding one, I'm glad to try to help you, because I know in different contents, sometimes it's hard to find close reading primary source documents, but we've always been able to find something that's appropriate, even if it's going back and finding a newspaper article related to your unit or something like that.
And can we use the Library of Congress? Because I know they have a lot of primary resources on there.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think that's the homeland for the primary source documents.
And you want us to cite it, right, correctly?
Yeah.
APA, okay. Okay.
All right.
And when is this due?
Well, this week you're doing the read aloud. Next week you're going to do the vocabulary and context and the deep processing vocabulary. And then 2 weeks from now, you're going to be doing the close reading. This way you have a blueprint of where you're going and you know what you're doing, and you can be looking for stuff that you need.
Okay, thank you.
Really quick, do you care if, when we're doing the read aloud, if our screen for the video doesn't have the actual text, because I have the physical book with me?
The important part is to see you doing modeling the graphic organizer.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question too. Can I do the read aloud and graphing using the master's book that I use in my class, normal class?
Everything's related to your unit though, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yep, then you're good to go.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, I know Sunday is hard. I appreciate all you guys doing it, but this was the only time most of you were available, so Sunday became the day. We'll probably do the next one like 3 weeks from now, and I'll send you out a notice and all that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for jumping in, guys.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you.